Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our town hall here in New Ulm. We're happy to be here, happy to see your smiling faces on another beautiful summer day. It sounds like it's going to be toasty come this weekend, but it's still good to be out and about. Senator Dahms and I do these town halls twice a year, basically, once before session and once after. Before to try and get an idea of what people are interested in, and after to kind of relay to you what has happened during session and answer your questions on a variety of topics. It was, as you probably have noticed, a very busy session. Lots of activity. Gary and I, both as Republicans, were kind of for much of the session and just watching, because when the Democrats have a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate, and the governor's office, they generally run the table, and they did. We were both there 10 years ago when Mark Dayton was governor, and at that time they were more reserved. They didn't take as many chances, I would say, and were not as aggressive on promoting things that are not necessarily fully thought out or broadly supported. But this time they were very aggressive and passed a lot of legislation. The big difference, of course, going into session was there was a $17.5 billion surplus going in. So there was plenty of money around. But in spite of that surplus, they also added a number of new taxes and fees on top of that. So new spending is astronomical. They're growing state budget by something over 40%, which is a huge growth, and we'll talk more about how that hits different areas of the budget as we move along. Both Gary and I worked hard on the nursing home issue. Within my caucus, I formed a committee way back in January that I called the Crisis Care Committee, the Care Crisis Committee, because we had this situation where nursing homes were really struggling. In fact, some of them, a couple of them actually closed during session. Others had closed prior to that. But it wasn't just a nursing home problem, it was also a problem with our hospitals too, because they had patients in beds that were ready to be discharged to care in nursing homes, but the nursing homes didn't have the staffing, so they didn't have the beds in order to accommodate those patients. So this backup, plus the challenge of nursing homes just not having enough resources to function properly. And we worked that issue the entire session. My hope originally was that we could kind of do it behind the scenes and get cooperation from everyone and get it off moving quickly. That did not happen. It ended up being part of the end of session negotiations, actually, as we ended the session, but we had a good result with some significant funding for nursing homes, and hopefully we can make sure that that is properly administered. It just seems like the administration didn't really appreciate how challenging a situation nursing homes are in. They kept looking at the projected spending, thinking that things were being taken care of when we knew they weren't, and so we're happy to make some progress there. I'll turn it over to Gary. There's a lot of territory to cover here this morning. We won't get through everything because there are pretty massive changes in many areas of state government. When you grow government this much, there's bound to be. But I'll turn it over to Gary at this time.
Well, thank you, Paul. And I think a couple of things certainly that hit home right here in New Ulm is, one, the education funding, and then I'll talk a little more about the nursing home funding and how that process worked out at the end. But in education, the Senate Republicans, we had a formula. We wanted to put 5% in the basic formula the first year and 5% the second year. And that would have cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $700 to $800 million. Now, they spent $2.5 billion new money in education. There were a lot of mandates that were put into education this year that were unfunded. So even with a 5% the first year and a 5% the second year on the basic formula, that still was going to put the school systems in a position to where about 50% of the mandates were going to be unfunded. So as it ended up, when the bill left the Senate floor, we had 5% and 5% on the formula, and then that went into the conference committee. When it come out of the conference committee, they still spent about $2.5 billion on education. However, they only put 4% in the first year and 2% in the second year. So with doing that, that puts our local school districts in a position to where somewhere between 50 and 55% of the unfunded mandates are not going to be funded by the formula because the formula got cut back considerably. So that money is going to have to be taken out of the local school districts through reserves, property taxes or something like that, which is very, very unfortunate. So that's an issue there. Just to give you an idea, the paid family leave bill that was passed, that the school districts will have to, they'll have to participate in that. That costs the school districts about 2% per year of the basic formula that we were going to put in there. So the first year, if they put 4% in, that means there's only 2% that can be used for other mandates. And in the second year, that 2% will be gone just in doing the paid family leave. So you can see it's going to put our local school districts in a real crunch financially this coming biennium. Then in the nursing homes, we had worked all session trying to get money for the nursing homes. And when the HHS bill came to the floor, we were hoping to get some money in that. At the end of the day, what we did get in the Senate bill was we had $187 million of new money for nursing homes. Now, that was not enough to solve the issue, but it certainly was a good start. So we really felt that we were in a pretty good position, and that when the bill left, it was a bipartisan bill, supported by the Republicans and the Democrats. We couldn't get any more money in it, but we figured with 187, we needed to move forward with that. So that 187 million went into conference committee. The conference committee said, no, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're only going to put 100 million in the nursing homes, and those are going to be loans, not grants. So we'll give an 18-month interest-free loan, and then in 18 months that has to be paid back. That was what they were going to do for nursing homes. That was the extent they were going to do. That was supported by the House DFL and supported by the governor. Fortunately, back in March when they wanted to do an early bonding bill, we said, no, we're not going to put the votes up for that because that's the only leverage we have. And down the road, at that point in time, we were looking at using that in order to get some relief on the state income tax on Social Security. But as time went on, we tried various times to get money for nursing homes and do it with amendments on different bills on the floor, and those amendments would always be defeated. And so it came quite clear the last couple of days of the session that if we were going to get anything in the nursing homes, it was going to have to be through a bonding, through negotiating a bonding bill. Fortunately, late Friday night, we got an agreement with the House that we would put $300 million new money into the nursing home program. So what it amounts to is that it's going to give instant help because the $300 million, 175 million of that is going to be divided in over a 2-year period to all the rural nursing homes. So the August 1st of 2023, the nursing homes will get a check, and that money can be used for salaries, it can be used for various different things. And then they'll get the balance of that throughout the next 2 years, and that'll also be money. Part of it's earmarked for salaries for the staff. And then also by putting that $300 extra million in, we still have the first million that they had that'll be used for loans. Then there'll be the $300 million that is going to be used to get our nursing homes some cash flow and some assistance to their employees. And then by doing that, we also Medicaid will pay the federal will pay another $57 million to us for Medicaid because of the increased money that we're spending. We get another $57 million from them, And then also, that'll bring the private rates up about 27 million, because in Minnesota, the private rate can only be equal to Medicaid, it can't be over. But if you just take that increase in the funding that's gonna be, that'll bring another 27 million there. So that bill's gonna be $375 million of new money, plus what's already there from the previous years. And what we're trying to do with that is help shorten up that gap, because right now, nursing home pays are short, they're behind about 21 months. And so that's a lot of cash flow that nursing homes have to put out. So what we want to do is make sure that we start shortening that gap up so that we get these Medicaid payments out to the nursing homes much sooner. So is it the answer to everything? No, but it certainly is a good lifeline. And it certainly is going to give the nursing homes an opportunity. It should stop the closing of nursing homes, and should take the pressure off of some of the hospitals that end up keeping patients because they have no place to go, because we should be able to get these, get these numbered beds and stuff start coming back. So for rural Minnesota, that's really, is a good piece of legislation that's really gonna help rural Minnesota nursing homes and help our elderly. So that was really good to see that happen. Certainly a lot of other things that came about that we kind of were surprised with, because when we'd get a bill in, you would hear it in committee, and when it would finally get to the floor, there'd be these new additions that you weren't sure what they were for and why were they were there, but the votes were there to pass them. So just in the abortion bill, that was Senate file number 1, the first bill. We had 60 amendments on that bill, and not a single amendment got taken. So that kind of set the tone, and that's kind of the way the session went. But at the end of the day, we negotiated where we could and tried to get a few pieces in here and there, and we were able to get some of that stuff done. So with that said, we'll open it up for questions. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Laura Bickner. I'm the Director of Finance at Oak Hills Living Center. So I want to thank you both for listening to us and actually hearing us. And you are correct. It isn't going to solve the nursing home problem that has, it's taken years to get to this point. But this is at least a step in the right direction. So I thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Gives you some breathing room. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Wendy Broderson. I'm the Fund Development Director, so I come from the opposite angle of Laura, which is, thank you very much. I know how much both of you advocated for us, especially at the very end when we were slated to get nothing. However, in terms of what we understand from working with Leading Age and how this will play out for us, when we went into session and some of those bills that did not pass, the $1 billion bill, we were asking for $52 per resident day.
Right.
At the end of session, we received $12.35 per resident day. So we're actually not getting a big check. We're being able to start being reimbursed as of July 1st for $12.35 additional per day per resident. So for 94 beds, that equates to about $35,000 per month. And we operate in an $11 million budget. So for us, yes, $35,000 a month is, thank you. That's $35,000 we didn't have now. But when you talk about the state receiving $300 million, and Oak Hills alone operates on $11 million, you have to put that in a little bit of perspective, and we really need to go back next session and keep working on it. So thank you both. I know how much work you did. Aaron Hubert at Leading Age shared with me, particularly your Senator Dahms, how much at the very end you advocated for us. So thank you so much. But we will be back next session.
And that's certainly understandable. Like I said, it's not the cure, but it certainly helps. But you will be getting a sizable check August 1st.
So $225,000 August 1st to be
Yes.
paid to long-term debt is what Leading Age shared with us. We can't use that for salaries. We can use it to pay long-term debt. And we will get $225,000 August 1st of 2023 and $225,000 August 1st
Correct.
of 2024.
And you say that you cannot use that for salaries.
Leading Age told us we can only use it to pay long-term debt.
I'm
So
gonna
if
have
that needs to be clarified,
Yes,
would
that
be-
does,
Does need to
because
be clarified.
That
definitely
was
does,
not
yeah.
our understanding.
That was not what,
That was what was told
Yeah.
to actually all the nursing homes that are leading age members.
yes, yeah.
So yes, more clarification
Yeah.
needed and more work needed to solve
Mm-hmm.
the problem. And the budget, the money that we did get, the $12.35 is temporary from July 1st of 2023 to 12/31 of 2024. So it is not a long-term fix, like you stated. So we just need to keep our community informed that we need to continue advocating for nursing homes in Minnesota.
No, I don't disagree with you. It is amazing. Last year, we had a sizable bill for nursing homes, and we passed it off the Senate floor. It was just a little under $1 billion. Passed it off the Senate floor, and it would hit the DFL House, and the governor stopped it. And they were, at that point in time, they were willing to put some in, but nothing like what we needed. And this year, then they retracted from that. And I could never get it, when I would question them on the floor, I could never get an answer of why they were not willing to support nursing homes and support the elderly.
Yeah.
And we tried different ways of getting a conversation going, and there was just no willingness to talk about that. So it is something that is an issue, and like I say, this is gonna help a lot, but it's not gonna be the final fix, that's for sure.
Well, the real conflict seems to be with the department, that they just don't seem to understand how, you think they would, but they don't seem to understand how this affects nursing homes, how big of a problem it's been. Value-based reimbursement is part of that equation, of course, but they project this huge spending, but the spending has always fallen short of that because of the way value-based reimbursement works. So I think I know we'll be continuing to work on this and try to get this system so it actually functions properly for nursing homes. They're too important to ignore.
Yeah, and CMS just came out with some new VBR regulations, value-based reimbursement regulations. So more regulations and reimbursement based on the residents having higher acuity and getting paid differently for that. So it's the whole complication of trying to explain to the whole world how nursing homes are funded between CMS and DHS and all this stuff. So thank you both again. You both completely understand it and are very supportive of us, and we greatly appreciate that.
You bet.
Don't know if we completely understand it, but
At least you're willing to listen,
I
right?
think we still have some things to learn too. Next, anybody else wanna? Yes,
Hi, I'm Peg Sundell, and I try to be an eternal optimist. And is there any way that anybody can do anything about this extreme partisan? I mean, if we had two Democrats up here, they would say the same thing, that it's all them, it's all them. And you're very reasonable people, you're nice people. Why is it when you get up there,
okay.
if we were just sitting here having a conversation, you can have a conversation.
Yep. And I think that's a very, very fair question. And I think that there's a lot of people that are saying the same thing. What's the problem? The problem is that in this particular session, you had the trifecta.
Right.
So what happened is you had a very small contingent of people that took over it. I'm going to speak for the Senate, that took over the Senate DFL caucus. Most of them had, well, if you take the people that were running the DFL caucus this year, the longest anybody had been in that group that were running it were 2 years. Most of them came in this year. They had no idea of the protocol of the Senate. They had no idea of the rules you work within. They had no idea of the proper way to get bills passed. They just came in, they done what they wanted to do because they had the votes. And so when we're sitting there and you have a $17.5 billion budget after adjusted for inflation, or a $19 billion budget, we fully expected there to be conversations on how that money was going to be spent, and fully expected that there would be some new programs, There'd be some increased spending for some different areas, education and nursing homes, things like this. But there would also be some reduction in some of the taxes. And those reductions wouldn't necessarily be for the wealthy. Those reductions, in the most part, would be for middle and lower income folks. No interest. Basically, very little interest in doing that. So we ended up spending $17.5 billion of surplus. That's spent. And they didn't have enough money. They had more things they wanted to do. So they increased new taxes, new fees, and increased other taxes and other fees to the tune of almost $11 billion. Now, that's why there was very little getting together, because the first bill out of the box was the abortion bill. And I know there's a difference of opinion on that. But there are some things that if everybody in this room read that bill would say, no, this piece went too far. Other things they'd say, that's acceptable. But we could not get a single amendment on that bill. And that was just the start. It didn't make any difference that it was the abortion bill. No matter what it was, if it was a labor bill, it didn't make any difference. I would say we might have got, I don't need all these fingers to tell you how many amendments we got on bills on the floor. It just never happened. Toward the end, we got about three amendments on, and then they just took them off in conference committee. They had no intentions of keeping those amendments. They were going to do what they wanted to do. They were going to spend the money they wanted to spend, and they were going to. And this was a budget year, so we should have focused on the budget. They were more focused on policy than they were on the budget. And so when they got to the end, they started running out of money. They brought a couple of bills back to finance that I sit on and reduced the amount they were going to spend because they didn't know where it was going to come from. Well, then they decided they were going to have to raise the taxes and fees more. And it just in boat, I mean, getting off the trail here, but just in boats only, if you take the personal watercraft, your jet skis and your boats and your pontoons, the license fees increase on those was over $16 million for just that little category. People just can't keep affording this stuff, but yet it was a runaway train. If we take a look, I came in 2011. From 2011 through the 2022 biennium, we increased spending by about $18.5 billion over that 12-year period. This year alone, they spent close to $30 million, or $18.5 billion in that 12 years. This year, they spent close to 30 to 31 billion. Now, not all of that was tailed money, meaning that there was one-time spend. So if you take the one-time spend out of there, you're 20 to 21 billion dollars spent. That'll have tails and it'll be continued. And they did that in 1 2-year period, when it took 12 years or 6 2-year periods to get to the level that they spent this year. And what's going to happen next year? They had projected a budget surplus, a small one for this coming biennium, and then very likely a deficit 4 years from now. Now they're backing that up and saying that if we have a surplus, it's going to be very, very small, but we're more than likely going to have a deficit in 2 years, in the next biennium. So what's going to happen when we have a deficit in 2 years? Now you're going to have to go back and start adjusting spending. And so those are some of the reasons it's hard to get together, is the philosophy of the left and the philosophy of the right, that gap has got much wider. When I first came in, I can remember Jimmy Metzen come to me one day and he said, you take your top 6 righty folks out and I'll take my top 6 lefties out of here and we'll get this stuff done in a couple hours. Right. Today it's not that way. I mean, what people feel is important is very different on both sides of the aisle. Paul?
Well, so I go back and think about the way things were 10 years ago the last time that the DFL had a trifecta, Mark Dayton was governor, and they had control of both houses and the governor's office. But their approach was much more reserved. For instance, they could have raised the gas tax. They talked about raising the gas tax, but at the end they decided not to because they know it was unpopular with the public, and they didn't want to take the political hit for that. This time, they not only raised the gas tax, they raised registration fees on vehicles and other transportation fees, so it's going to be a lot more expensive to drive. But they just felt that they needed to be more aggressive. There was an article in the Trib a few weeks ago about what happened before the session. And when the Democrats got together to do their planning for the session, those that had been there 10 years ago, especially some of the staff, said, we missed opportunities. We had initiatives that we thought should have moved forward. We didn't move them forward. But this time, we're suggesting that we move everything forward and just take our chances with a very liberal agenda that is not supported by almost half the state. The margin, they only had one vote margin in the House and 6 seats or so or one vote in the Senate, I'm sorry, and 6 seats or so in the House. So it wasn't like they had these huge majorities, but they had enough majority and they stuck together and they passed a lot of things that are not very popular, especially out here in Greater Minnesota, where we are a majority pro-life, at least in my district, and they just walked all over that. We don't like big government, but government's going to grow immensely. Many departments, they're hiring 400 new employees for things like the cannabis bill and the family department, and it's going to be a lot more state government. And if you like lots of government, this session was tremendously successful. The other thing is when you look at an election map, not only of Minnesota but of the country in general, it's pretty much gone rural red and metro blue. And I don't think that's healthy. Because in our caucus, which is mostly rural members now, when a city issue comes up, where's the expertise within our caucus to speak to issues that are metro related? On the other hand, in the DFL caucus, it's gone pretty much all either metro or regional population centers. Who stands up for the rural issues in that caucus? So it kind of becomes more and more divided, and that's long-term not healthy. On the other hand, we still have lots of conversations across the aisle. In spite of, them passing things that we didn't support, I still...
in the hallways, not when it's on TV.
Yeah, right, exactly. But the media, the media is not much interested in those of us that get along. They're much more interested in those of us that have a big fight. So that gets the most media coverage, the work done behind the scenes where we actually do make some progress and find, I look at this work as finding solutions that work for everybody, not just for a select few or for a certain faction of our society. That's the real trick to this work. It's not... It's more the exploration of ideas and trying to figure out, well, we got a problem, and we oftentimes agree that there is a problem, but what's the proper solution? Is it just raising taxes and spending more money and more government, or is it...
It's okay to have a different way to look at it. You have 2 paths, but where do those paths cross? What part of it is okay?
Exactly.
It's...
So anyway, that's the challenge we face. But on the other hand, I'm very proud of my state. I'm glad I live in Minnesota, and I don't know where else I'd rather be. But our work is cut out for us. There's no doubt about that. Other topics. I touched transportation a little bit. The good news in transportation is there's going to be a significant amount of money for road construction all the way up and down from townships through small towns, all the way up to our state road system. And there is some significant federal money that is going to come over the next 5 years, and will now, with the new spending in transportation, we know we have the state dollars to match those federal funds that are coming. I just don't agree with the way they went about discovering the funds. I think that transportation is important enough to depend on the general fund for funding, but they chose to make it more expensive to drive through the gas tax and registration fees. But we will see significant money spent both on roads and bridges and on transit. Much of the transit money gets focused on the metro, and I could spend another half an hour talking about Southwest Light Rail and the train to Duluth, et cetera, but I won't. I'm not anti-train, but boy, so far our track record in Minnesota is pretty abysmal. So there are some good things there. Gary talked a little bit about education, and we know that there's a lot more money going into education, but they've put a lot of strings on that money, and so it's a lot of it is spent by mandate, and so superintendents I've talked to are saying, basically we're not really getting more money to do the things we want to do. We're getting more money to do the things that the state is demanding that we do. And so won't be any flexibility there. So our local school boards will not have much say over how things are spent. One of the good news pieces in there, though, is if you're familiar with cross subsidy, that's funding for students with special needs. It's mandated by the federal government, but it's never been fully funded. There's a significant amount of money going to that from this new state allocation for education. So there are some good things that are getting done. I worry about what happens if the economy takes a downturn. We were both there when we had a $6 billion deficit, and you're looking everywhere to try and figure out how to continue the services that are needed at the same time as getting the budget balanced. So I think they've put us in a more challenging position should that come about. So other areas or questions?
Just to follow up on
Sure.
that, Paul, on transportation. Rural Minnesota, typically communities under 5,000 have received very, very little funding. This year, there's actually now funding for that, and that funding is to go on through the future. So communities under 5,000 will now start getting some money. They don't get LGA, as I remember right, but they'll get some money now for roads and bridges. Townships will be the same. They'll start getting money for roads and bridges. In the agricultural bill, we have ag and rural development, and under rural development includes the broadband piece. And again, this year we put some reasonable amount of money into broadband, and it's starting to really show in rural Minnesota. We're getting a lot more broadband outstate, and that helps a lot. We have a lot of companies now that have chosen, in the Twin Cities, that have chosen to let a lot of their folks work at home. So in rural Minnesota, the better broadband we can get, the higher speeds and stuff, the more potential we have to attract folks who would just like to get out in a rural area but still have their decent paying job in the Twin Cities. And so we're seeing more and more of that, and that should continue. And of course, thanks to Navera and those folks that are different providers out throughout southwest Minnesota, especially in our districts, that have done a great job of getting that out there. And last year there was quite a bit of money came through the COVID funding through the federal government, and there'll be some more coming, part of that 5-year payment. So much of that can be used for broadband every year, so that's going to help. But a lot of work to be done yet, but it's certainly going on the right direction. There was quite a bit of money put into agriculture this year for beginning farmers and loans for beginning farmers and things like that, which we've had in the past. This year we beefed that up a little bit. And then also this year there was some programs in the ag bill to help smaller farmers, specialty farmers, crop producers, vegetable farmers, stuff like that. There was some money in there for that. So that's been happening for a couple of years. It was tried several years ago, and it was kind of a so-so type how it worked out. But I think they started it in again a couple of years ago, and it looks like that's a different platform now and working much better. So that's an opportunity that folks will have that want to be in rural Minnesota and provide living for themselves through those types of crops and that type of marketing and stuff. So a lot of things went on. There was certainly some, a lot of good stuff that went on this year, and a lot of small stuff that got picked up. So any other questions or comments?
I'm Deb Eglin. And every time I hear about the pro-life issues, something that bothers me, we just moved here from Iowa a couple of years ago, and I know that the systems, the foster care and that sort of thing down in Iowa was not doing well. And when I hear about the pro-life and abortion, all that's ever talked about is actually abortion. I don't hear any money going to programs to help unwed mothers, programs to help with substance abuse, which a lot of unwed mothers are also dealing with. I mean, I feel like it's just the birth of the baby and then who cares? So is that also being included when you talk about pro-life? Is it life throughout your lifetime, or is it just being born?
It's not just being born. We put several dollars in each year for children, and for these different things, there's several dollars go into a program for that each year. Now, could it be better? Could it be more? I mean, it always can be more money, but no, I think it's, I'm not saying it's a stellar network, but it certainly is a decent network. And I think the biggest problem we have in Minnesota right now is probably the mental illness issue that we keep struggling with, and we keep putting money in it, but it's hard to know. I mean, it's a tough issue. And so we have a lot of situations to where we have people with mental illness that we're not getting them into an institution where they can be treated in time to get them treated under that current issue that they're having. But it's being worked on, but you could always be putting more money in there. But it's, I think you're right. I think when we talk about it, that's what you hear about, but there's a lot more to it than that. There are certainly programs. If a mother decides that she wants to keep her baby instead of having an abortion, there's a process that we fund and help take care of the mother and the child and this, that. Yes. Yep.
Monty?
As usual, I should have spoke, I'm sorry, I'm Monty Marlowe. As usual, I should have spoke before Senator Dahms because he beat me to my point. I'm gonna use a dirty word, I'm a lobbyist. So I deal with folks on both sides, and also your question and that conversation is fascinating. But I'm here, I wanna talk about these two. As somebody that deals with legislators from both sides of the aisle, all over the state, you're looking at probably two of the best in the state. Their accessibility, their staff, their communication, what they do, the honest conversations you can have with them, the fact that they both push back a lot of times is, I just want to say to the crowd, we're incredibly fortunate to have what we have. Because there are others that quite frankly throw people like me out of their office, or they won't take meetings at all, they don't want to listen, they quite frankly they're concerned about themselves. And they don't put their constituents first, and you're looking at two of the best. That's all I have to say.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monty. That was very kind. It's not easy work, as you probably know. I was fortunate enough this session. Our caucus elected a new leader. Kurt Dowd had been the leader of our caucus for a long time. After the election, we elected a new leader. Her name is Lisa Dahms from the Cold Spring area. She's excellent. She's in her third term in the House, so she's got a learning curve to climb, frankly. Stepping into leadership and stepping in early like that. Well, when she got elected, then she turned and asked me to be her deputy. So I'm the deputy leader of the Republican caucus. So I'm the number 2 guy, and my LA, you mentioned our staff, and we are both very dependent on good staff. My staff ordered a badge for me. It says Deputy Torque on it, so I don't actually wear it, but I do have some extensive responsibilities within the caucus to try and make sure to, well, I call it herding cats. That's what I call it. So, and Gary does a lot of that sort of work in his caucus too. It's a team. Teamwork is so important in the legislature because individually we can't do anything really. One vote doesn't go very far. It's when your caucus works together and when you can reach across the aisle and get support for an issue that you're working on. That's when things can get done. But sometimes it takes years to get something accomplished because it just takes time to build the support necessary.
Anybody else? Yes?
I would just request that for future town halls, if you could try to schedule them for evening or Saturday hours. Obviously, this time is not suiting people very well. It's, impossible for people who are working day shifts and not retired to be here. We have 11 citizens from a community of 14,000 people, and I think we could do better than that. Thank you.
Well, we wish there were more here, put it that way. But it's not the only way to reach us, of course. And we both are in our communities when asked to be. So if a group wants us to come, I'm sure if we could find a time, we'd come and meet with a group if that's necessary. To cover the entire district in a day, which is what we try to do, it requires that we work in the daytime. So, Gary, did you want to comment?
I have 2 house districts, so we do 6 on this side in this district, and I do 6 in the other district. And there's kind of a lot of different things that we have to look at when we do them, and this, that, and the next thing. And so I appreciate your information, appreciate your comments. We've had these conversations before. We've actually done town hall meetings at different times of the day, different times in the evening, and the results really don't change much, quite frankly. And so that plays into it, but certainly, if you got some questions, certainly feel free to give us a call. And town hall meetings go up and down. There's times when we have a group like this, there's other times when the group is considerably higher. And I've got several other communities, and the only other community of this size of this would be Marshall, and that's up and down too. I mean, it doesn't make any difference when we do them, as much as I don't know what it is, but there's times when the place is packed, there's times when there's hardly anybody there. So, I don't know what causes people to come and not to come. Yep. Other comments or concerns?
Go ahead.
Yes.
I guess I'm thinking nursing home right now. I've worked in that field for
Yeah.
many years. I'll be very honest, had I not been married, I could not afford to have worked. That's just a fact. And many of the people that have worked for, the salaries do not pay. I feel that if you work your 60 hours a week, 40 hours a week, you should be able to afford to take care of yourself. I could not have done that. And that's an issue. But my biggest thing is, what are we going to do? How are we going to go to put a lightning bolt to get people to realize we're all getting older, we want the care. We want a bellyache about the cost, but the fact is it costs to take care of us. How are we going to get that in our minds, that this is a fact of life? If we want the quality of care that we expect, how are we going to get people to realize it costs, but if we don't do it, what's going to happen?
Well, first, thank you for your work and your dedication to the residents of the nursing home. And there are many like you who are dedicated and work hard, and you're not well compensated. We know that. And both Gary and I are certainly been advocates for our nursing homes. And I think about how much nursing homes have changed. I think back to when I was in high school and my grandmother went to the nursing home, and it was a much different place because a lot of the residents were still reasonably healthy. It was more like assisted living is today, right? So the residents, many of them could do a lot of things for themselves, and it was a much different environment. And we had candy stripers. You remember them? A lot of teenagers would volunteer and work in the nursing homes. Well, over time, it's changed dramatically as we've seen the development of assisted living and congregate care facilities that are great. I'm not I'm not diminishing the work they do important work, but it's changed the way our nursing homes
Well,
operate.
too, is the big thing I saw, I think it was in '89, we put in the physical therapy.
Mm-hmm,
And with that, people could get up and learn how to walk again and go. Before that, you fell, you broke a hip, you're in the
Yeah.
wheelchair,
you were done, yeah.
and that was a major thing. And now I worked at Highland Manor in Oak Hills.
Mm-hmm,
And we did the business with the physical therapy. And then we did add on the assisted living.
mm-hmm.
That was a way of trying to build the revenue, and that's the part I worked in for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of years. Then we, we had the special unit for dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And then, no, the big thing we did, the last thing was the rehab.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wasn't that we were sitting on our laurels doing
No.
nothing, it was, we were trying all along. But, you know, this bucket is emptying awfully fast, and there's gonna be a lot of people without having the care that we expect if something drastic isn't done. And like the women were saying, you've done a marvelous job on getting something done. But a lot has to be done, or we're gonna be in major big trouble.
Well, and you mentioned the demographics, the baby boom bubble is
Yeah.
there, we're in it, so to speak, and so there's a lot of demand,
Some
and,
of you are.
Well, I think that's the thing that amazes me, is that you look at the group, there are a lot of gray-haired people and bald people, and, I mean, we're getting
And she
older.
looks at me.
I think she's looking
I was
at me.
looking at you. But seriously, we've gotta
Yeah.
do something, because this is gonna bounce us. And now in New Ulm here, our elderly population is the same as our younger population.
Mhm.
Yes.
And so they're both extremely, extremely important,
Yes,
and we have to face it.
yes,
I'm sorry.
You,
No,
no,
thank you
no,
for
I
your-
appreciate your input.
you're right on the money.
When you say how can you have one big lightning bolt? It's gonna take several small lightning strikes is what it's gonna take, because we've got so many different people that we need to get them to first be aware of the situation and then understand how dire a situation it really is. You know, when you could hire people readily, and there was a lot of people looking for jobs, today we're not there. Today there are a lot of jobs with very few people willing to fill them or able to fill them. And then you get to a situation in a nursing home, it takes a special person.
Without a doubt.
You have to, you have to be the type of person that can handle a lot of issues,
And enjoy it.
yes, and not take them home. I mean, you have to be able, it just takes a special person to do that, and unfortunately, the pay just isn't there. And part of there's several problems, but part of the problem is there's a considerable difference between the metro payment and the rural payment. And we've got to work on that, as one of those lightning strikes has to be that the cost is different, but not near as different as what they want to make the payment. We need to get that more equalized so that rural Minnesota gets paid their fair share to have somebody in a nursing home that they do in the cities. One of the problems is, in my opinion, is I think the city structure, those payments, I think, are based on an assumption that a lot of those folks are unionized and have higher costs. Well, that's not necessarily true, and our costs out here are not that much different. And another problem we have is that when what we get paid is considerably less than what the Twin Cities, the Metro gets paid, we're closer to actually in many cases less than what you could probably get a job at one of the fast food restaurants.
Absolutely.
So now you come to work in the nursing home and something happens to somebody and you've been taking care of them for a couple of years, that really is draining. You go to work for one of the fast food restaurants, and I come in and I get a burger from you, and it's a bad burger, and I come back to the counter and say, you know, this burger's cold and wasn't good. You just say, smile, and you go get a different burger, and you give it to me, and everybody's happy. It doesn't work that way in a nursing home. You take those things home with you. And so somehow we got to get that lightning to strike there. Another place we have to get lightning to strike is with the department. I was amazed at some of the comments that were made by the Department of Health and Human Services, by the actual commissioner. There's got to be some reality brought into that process. And that's another area. And we have to get our colleagues to understand what's happening in rural Minnesota with nursing homes, and what's happening, what if impact that's having on hospitals and things like that. We've got to get people to start understanding that, and I'm not sure just what that key is, but it is something that has to happen, because in one of my floor speeches, I said, you need to understand, folks, if we don't take this seriously, pretty soon, Grandpa and Grandma are going to be parked out on the boulevard. And that's a sad thing, but you know what? It's reality. I don't know how many thousands of people it was when they did a survey last year could not find they needed to go to a nursing home and couldn't find one.
Well, we lost, where was it, 3 around, just right around here.
Yeah.
Yes,
And
Well,
it-
back
that's devastating.
yes.
I might have the month wrong, but I think it was November of last year, there were like 11,000 people that tried to get into
Yep.
nursing homes and couldn't in just
Right.
1 month.
About 500 a day.
Right,
Wow, that's just.
and that's
it's-
going to grow.
Yeah.
And
So
how many
it
of us
is.
want to live with our children?
What's that?
Us want to live with our children, or have our children will let us live with them.
We don't take offense, we're okay.
You know, society has really changed. I mean, people are much healthier and they live much longer and they're much more independent, and that's great. And I can remember back when I was a young person, my grandpa stayed with us when instead of going to nursing home, he stayed with my parents and thought nothing of it. Today, that's not the way it works, but our children are much more mobile. Most of our children are now working. In the older days, you know, a lot of them, both parents weren't working, and so it makes a big difference. But what we have today is what we have to deal with and have to figure out how to manage it, and it's not an easy answer.
And
Can you
we've talked-
explain briefly what you meant about the metro get a different reimbursement than the rural? I mean, I know it would probably take from now till 5 o'clock tonight to make me understand it, but.
A simple, Medicaid rates are higher in Twin Cities than they're out here.
For hospitals and nursing homes.
Yes,
Any medical
And
practice.
is
Yes.
that federal or,
Medicaid is state.
okay, so that could change.
What's that?
That could, theoretically, that could change.
We worked yes, I mean, and then we worked very hard to try to get
And that's
that
where that
change.
$12 came from. $12, that's a Medicaid rate?
That is a Medicaid.
That is a
That is the
Medicaid rate.
Or the
It came
increase?
out of this new money,
Okay,
and that still does not do the equalization that we're looking for it to
Okay.
do. We have to get that gap, and I don't know the gap, but it is sizable,
It is.
and we have to get that gap shortened up, otherwise we can't survive out here.
okay.
And they're not gonna take less than the cities, they have to give us more,
Right.
and that's what has to
Right.
happen.
So-
And,
And where does that money come?
I'm sorry, Paul.
Where does
No,
that,
it's-
which pot does that money Medicaid money come out of? Is that general fund?
General fund, yeah.
General fund money, okay.
So we've talked a lot about nursing homes, and it's a very important topic, but we cannot forget about our group homes too.
Yeah.
Because they are in a similar
Similar
situation,
boat,
and
yeah.
they're trying to access this kind of the same workforce. So we need to keep them in balance with our nursing homes, because both of these types of facilities provide very important care for needy people, and it's not just elderly, of course, it's others that have acute needs, and we need to make sure that both of those sectors are taken care of. Because if we push one up higher than the other, then that workforce problem just becomes worse.
So did the group homes benefit from the,
They
Legislation
did
that was
benefit
made?
in the legislation that passed this year.
they did
I
benefit?
don't have the details for you, but I
No.
know they did benefit, yes.
Okay.
Yep. But it wasn't part of this
No.
piece, but there were
Okay.
pieces in earlier bills that, yes, there was some headway there, yep. Well, we're getting toward that time. Certainly want to thank everybody for coming, and I know it's a smaller group, but do appreciate folks for coming. Remind everybody that Paul and I both do newsletters, and we do a newsletter weekly during the session, and then once we get out of session, we usually do a monthly. Once in a while, we'll do 2 in a month, but usually it's a monthly newsletter. If you want to get on, you can either contact Paul's office or my office. And if you want to get on Paul's, you have to contact his. You want to get on mine, you'd have to contact my office, but we'll get you on. And we try to give you an idea during session, try to keep you updated as to what bills got passed, what's coming up the following week, and things like that. And then usually we highlight one bill each week of what's going on. So, and other than that, certainly feel free to give us a call at the office anytime you got a question. We always appreciate hearing from our constituents, because that's how we find out truly what's going on. And don't feel like you're being a pain in the butt, because you're not. We want to hear what's going on, because that's how we know. And the people that can give us the best advice are the people that have their feet in the street doing the job, or involved with an issue, that know what's happening. So with that said, Paul?
Well, I'm so surprised that nobody asked about raising marijuana in their basement. Starting.
Doing it for years. Joking.
So, well, your record will be expunged, so you don't need to worry about that. Starting August 1st, you can have up to 8 plants growing in your private residence.
So many can be ready.
Only half of them can be ready for harvest, so
Yeah, it's like
you gotta
saying-
rotate your crop. This is a big change for our state. We are the 23rd state to legalize marijuana.
Speaking of marijuana, the thing that bothers me is that it seems like there should be some regulation on what form it's in. What bothers me is the idea that they make gummy marijuana. And
Don't
I've
get me,
heard so
I'm
much
sorry I
about
started
young
this
kids.
now. I'm sorry, I know, I share your concerns. I
It just
think
seems horrible, because you could have a jar of that in your house, and little kids could chew
that,
it and eat a whole bunch of it.
that has
That bothers
happened.
me a lot.
That's always been.
That has happened.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it's here. There are a lot of other ramifications to this, dealing with the federal government, whether it's banking or commercial driver's licenses, et cetera. This is going to be a big change, but it's coming, and it's starting August 1st as far as the private side of it. Now, the public side, where it's sold in dispensaries, that's a ways off. They haven't developed all that yet. We could spend another half hour. I just want to also thank you for turning out this morning and to talk about the issues in our districts. And please,
Just one thing, you're not gonna turn your
yes.
fields over and start growing?
I have no intention of,
Because I heard you were a farmer.
partaking in either the growing or consumption of this product, so you don't need to worry about me. But yeah, it is a big change, and we'll see how it all works out. But as Gary said, reach out to us anytime. We try to stay in contact with our constituents as best we can, and happy to hear from you, and hope you all have a safe journey home. Enjoy the nice weather while it lasts, and we'll see you again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.